morning. Today I'm going to reflect on the analysis of change in complex adaptive systems. And I'll depict the complex adaptive system as this kind of space here, which has many different elements going through various micro changes. And the question is, if we consider one of these elements, then what's the nature of the change? Let's depict that as C, that's happening at any instant in time. And to resolve this, we're going to refer to the equation I derived previously of, or at least part of the equation of emergence in space-time. And so we have emergence in space-time here, which essentially has three matrices: light, space, time, and it's recursive, taking some untransformed set. So we have a transformation circle that results in a transformed set. So we have an initial untransformed set xu that takes a previously transformed set, and so this equation at any point time plus x or time plus a takes the previous set that had already emerged from the application of this equation. But as a starting point and as a reminder, what we're saying is that in this equation there are stances of light reflected by the speeds of light. So we're hypothesizing that there's different abstract layers that have a different nature, and that nature becomes clearer when we consider the speed of light in that layer. So if we consider a finite speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, that characterizes this untransformed or physical layer in which we exist, we know that by virtue of its finiteness, there's a past, present, future that's created. And further, because if we take the inverse of the speed of light, we arrive at Planck's constant. It's proportional to Planck's constant, which defines, just as the speed of light defines a higher bound, this defines a lower bound. And this Planck's constant describes quanta, or the minimum amount of energy that is required for energy to sustain itself, and therefore for matter to exist. If h were smaller, then matter could not exist. And so what we have is a past, a present, a future, characterized by connection between these islands of matter that emerge due to fundamentally the finite speed of light. And we had referred to these four fundamental characteristics that emerge from considering the speed of light as the physical, the vital, the mental, and integral. And so when we consider emergence, we consider this space matrix here. What we're really looking at is what we refer to as the untransformed layer, which has dynamics characterized by these sets or these untransformed sets. And emergence in space-time really means that we're taking untransformed sets, and then through the action of the meta layers, which we refer to, we arrive at some kind of transformed set that then becomes the further basis for further evolution and integration between these layers. So when we're considering the rate of change in a complex adaptive system, or the nature of change, then what we're really fundamentally asking is, how does this resolve itself? Is it a relatively untransformed set that's emerging, or is the source of inspiration of this? So is it the untransformed physical, the untransformed vital, the untransformed mental, the untransformed integral, or is it a relatively transformed physical, vital, mental, or integral? And depending on our analysis here, we may arrive at the fact that yes, it's relatively untransformed. If it's untransformed, then we know that the source of the inspiration is at the untransformed layer, if it's a relatively transformed set, then the question is, what is the source of inspiration? And recall we had set up several meta levels. We refer to M1, M2, M3, and the question is the source of inspiration or the source of change M2, M2, M1, M2, M3. And obviously if it's M3, then we can hypothesize that, or rather it's clear that the depth of change is very deep, and the endurance of that change is going to be existing for a longer time. And so we may split this into grids and into a grid, and then based on where it is, we have a sense for how enduring, how sustainable, and how far-reaching any change might be. But coming back to this, since we are assuming here Planck's constant that is the inverse of c, when we enter into the quantum level, then we know that particles become waves. That implies that the Planck's constant becomes a smaller Planck's constant, if you will. It's a lower quantity where basically matter cannot sustain itself. That being the case, and since the speed of light is inversely proportional to that, we have to assume that the speed of light becomes something greater. So we have the speed of light at some layer n, which is greater than c to the u, and if we project that trend to its maximum, we reach an abstract layer where the speed of light is infinite. And at that infinity, if we think about that, what that really implies is that that intelligence, or that thing that exists with a speed of light of infinite, fundamentally has no past, present, future, because light is reaching everywhere instantaneously. So there's a melding of time, and then there's essentially, it knows itself completely. It's absolutely powerful in its space. It's absolutely present. It's absolutely loving. And we may refer to 4 fundamental properties, of which this is a reflection of presence, power, knowledge, and harmony, and say that in that abstract layer, everything is characterized by this omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, omniloving. And the question is, how do this fundamental nature that perhaps is what our system is in its depth about, reflect or precipitate into this infinite divergence or infinite variety that we see around us? And so we had constructed another abstract layer K, which would allow us to create this infinite divergence through the notion of sets. So we have a set of presence, a set of power, a set of knowledge, a set of harmony, and these are infinite sets. So there's infinite sources of innovation that exist in each of these 4 sets. And we, of course, have depicted the reality here, CK, as being a function of the reality of C infinite. And then similarly, this layer N, we had depicted as the reality of Cn being a function of the reality of Ck. And here, this is a critical point here, because the question is, how do these infinite sets organize themselves to become the seeds or the signatures for the infinite variety we see around us? And this is through the notion of what we're calling signature, which might be an element of a combination of elements of these sets of presence, power, harmony, knowledge, and harmony. So it's in a sense a product of these sets. The elements can be derived from the product of these sets, and the reality of the untransformed layer, Cu, where the speed of light is finite, is a function of the reality at Cn. And so this kind of gives us the rationale, if you will, of these meta layers. And so if we consider meta layer 1, what we're essentially saying is that it's characterized by these deep signatures or functions along these 4 dimensions. And if we're looking at reality at meta level 2, it's characterized by these architectural forces, which we'll just refer to as the sets of some fundamental system properties X, and we refer to M3 as being these fundamental system properties, these 4 fundamental system properties we refer to as system X. And then the question is, we had also considered how we might break into or allow these meta layers to become active here. And for instance, when we break certain patterns that exist at the untransformed layer, then we allow this meta layer to become active. So the question is, how do we practically analyze or figure out whether our source of inspiration or the source of change is emanating from a deeper layer? And we might be able to do this through considering an integral here. The integral, so we initially had considered this point, but now if we take a larger area A, then if we consider 0 to A, and if we see a consistency, so xu becoming xt in this larger space over time, when we consider this change, then we might say that if this were the case, then it would imply that we have the reality of signatures, or that might be the source of change. And similarly, if we want to figure out if M2 is really the source of the change, which would be more desirable, then we might be able to analyze that by considering a larger area B, because for something to become a force, it then is able to act in a much larger area. And so we would similarly look at this change xu to xt, and if this were true for this larger area Z0 to B, then we might consider that we really have this reality of the sets of these 4 fundamental properties being active. And if to understand if something is emanating from this meta level 3, or the source of the change is from there, then we might first of all consider a larger area, and second of all see how sustainable it is over time. So it's a double integral, and again, what's the degree of that change from xu to xt, and if it's above a certain threshold, we might figure that the source of the inspiration is M3. And so this is perhaps one way to, by considering the rate of change and then considering various integrals, understand what the nature of the change that's occurring in the system is.